'Cause,
Okay.
so go to 154.
Uh-huh.
Yep, that's where we are. Let's go ahead. I'm ready to start.
All right. Welcome, everybody. As a reminder, too, before we get started, for anybody too that can't join on Sunday mornings, this is now on Restoration Archives, and it's now a YouTube channel too that you could access easily now. So if you're familiar with YouTube, you could just simply go and subscribe. And anytime the new video pops up, it usually takes a day or two after Sunday for it to pop up. There is a YouTube channel, and it's also on the Restoration Archive site under regional meetings, so that you could access these recordings and if you missed a previous session. So with that, we'll get started. Turn it over to you, John.
Okay, thank you. All righty, so last week we finished up at a good ending place on the Hebrew calendar. There's quite a bit on that. It was pretty complicated. Today we start on the Mercury calendar. And it's, in a way, it's sort of a review of the Venus calendar because of what you'll see in this slide. We're on slide 154. And the phases of Mercury are similar to the phases of Venus because those are the two planets which are closer to the Earth, closer to the Sun than is the Earth. And so neither one of them can get very far from the Sun. So they are both morning stars and evening stars, but you'll never see either one up at midnight. If you look at Mars over here, Mars is farther from the Sun. So when Mars is over, I've got it shows it here a little off from opposite, but just picture it exactly opposite from the Sun. That would be midnight. Mars can be up at midnight. It can be up, it comes up and it goes all through the night, but it just has one passage through the night. It's not morning and evening, it's an all-night star, or an all-night planet. And so are all of the outer planets. Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune are all out there. By the way, those are the 5 planets that I believe all have calendars. Pluto, I do not believe is a planet. I believe it's an escaped moon of Neptune because its orbit crosses right where Neptune, right where it would have been a moon. And I remember when they discovered that Pluto had a moon, I remember thinking, Pluto can't have a moon because Pluto is a moon, but I guess, I guess it does. Anyway, Pluto does not seem to be a sacred calendar, whereas all of the others are. I've only done calendars out through Mars. I've got to do Jupiter and Saturn sometime, but the star calendar had priority. It is so important. With that in mind, we've studied the Venus calendar. You know it's a Venus, it's a morning and evening star. Mercury is a lot closer to the Sun. Therefore, Mercury, well, let's go to the next slide. This is, I believe, no, I guess this is probably it doesn't matter if it's a planetarium or a real picture. It's probably I don't know which it is because it's very well done. But, and the brightnesses are about right. Mercury, as you see there, is very close to the horizon. It doesn't get too much farther. It gets farther up than that, but not too much. Venus is much brighter. So even low in the sky, Venus is very bright. Mercury is as bright as a first magnitude star. And an example of two of first magnitude stars are the brightest stars you see in this picture. Mercury would be as bright as them, but it's down in the soup. It's down in the atmosphere. And so it looks about like it does here. You have to know right where to look for Mercury. And then in this picture, it shows Saturn and Mars and Jupiter all in a row, and that's nice. But as far as we're concerned for Mercury, There is a tradition or a legend or whatever that Kepler, I'm sorry, Copernicus, who came up with the sun is in the center, the theory of the solar system where the Earth's not at the center, the heliocentric system. There's a tradition that he never saw Mercury in his life. He knew, and that could be the reason that's repeated is it could be possible. If you don't have the tables, which he didn't have, of where it is, and you didn't know when to look, and you can't tell it's much different from a star, then so the way you see Mercury is you look up and you find out where it is on certain, and it's about, we're going to do the orbit, but it goes through its cycles 3 times a year. And there's usually once per year that it's really favorable as a morning star and once as an evening star. And the other times it's pretty low and pretty tough to see. Nevertheless, these calendars are not for how well you see things. They just chug along by themselves. And whether it's cloudy or not, they work. So let's go on to slide 156. The Mercury cycle is 115.877538 days on the average. And that's what it's used for the calendar. Excuse me, that's what it is. And then for the calendar, it's rounded up to 117. 117 is exactly 9 times 13. And I showed way back at, maybe I haven't shown that yet. Yeah, somewhere, I think earlier, I showed the picture where all of the planets, yeah, I did. I showed the planetary calendars, and they're all like gears like this. And the smallest gear is Mercury. It's got 9 teeth, and each tooth is 13 days. And all of the planets have teeth that are countable in 13 days. We've talked about the 13-day Trecena is the best unit of time to measure all of the planets. And you can see it's within about a day. An exact number of Trecenas is just about 1 day off of the actual orbit. So if you remember when we did the Venus calendar, it had 9 phases: creation, quickening, birth, adult, prime, death, resurrection, fullness, and Lord. And Venus had a long enough cycle of 585 days that it had several Trecenas in most of those phases. There were only a couple of them that were just 13 days long. Mercury, it can just barely squeeze in, but it does. It exactly squeezes in all 9 phases equally. It was equally spaced. And I've even got different colors there because let's go to the next slide, 157. Because this shows the two together. It turns out the 585 for Venus is exactly 5 times 117. See, this was all designed by a master clockmaker. This is not all random, Big Bang, whatever the rotational periods had to be as one is taught in astronomy. This is a designed clock. So the gear with the 9 teeth goes around 5 times, and the gear with 45 teeth exactly. And if you remember, there's 2 kinds of each of the calendars. There's the exact one that's going to average the 115.88 days. And there's the uniform version, which always has 117 days, and Venus always has 585. So for the uniform versions, this clock, and it starts right where it is. It starts with Lord and Lord together. And those are both, on both calendars, those are just 1 tooth, 13 days. And then the little wheel goes around inside the big wheel the same forever. It never changes. So Mercury and Venus are in a 5-to-1 ratio exactly on the uniform calendars. They have the same phases. And so, so this has implications when you start doing probabilities. When you find a day, let's look at that right now. When you find a day that's let's say one Lord on Venus, and you say, oh my goodness, it happens to be one Lord on Mercury too. Well, it will always be one Lord on Mercury. You shouldn't get excited and count that as an extra amazing coincidence. As when you're doing probabilities, you have to keep these things in mind and say, no, one Lord on Venus, if you can see where it is in this picture, or any number of the Lord Trecina, it will always line up exactly the same on Mercury. Now, that's not true the other way around. When Mercury's on one Lord, you can see as it rolls around 5 times, it can be at 5 different places, the same 5 places. So that might have been a little confusing, but I think you're wanting advanced things when you're taking this course, so that's something to keep in mind. Okay, next slide, 158. Okay, 107. Oh, this is the picture I thought I had already shown you. Okay, so I'm showing now. The 117-day Mercury cycle length is so useful to measure Venus, Jupiter, and Saturn cycles that I gave it a special name. It's called the Merc. And I tried to look up to see if that hadn't been used for much and if I had a nice, unique name. And when I named it, I think it was. Now there's other things named Merc or Singing Group or something. But anyway, I did my best shot. So one Merc is 117 days. And so when you measure things in Mercs, now Venus is exactly 5 Mercs, as I just said. Mars is not even in Merc. So Mars is 3 sacred rounds. And so that's really amazing. But Jupiter is 37 Mercs and Saturn is 92 Mercs. So solar system was designed. This can't just all happen by itself. Again, you have to sort of know probabilities and what you can prove, but these are not random numbers. Okay, next slide, 159. Now, this is just something I think is cute. It might turn out to be really important. I don't know. But I said there's about 3 Mercury cycles per year. Well, if you want it more exact, there's pi Mercury cycles per year. And pi is 3.14, 3 1/7. And so if you do it in sevenths, it turns out that in 7 Earth years, there's not 20, if there were 21 cycles, there'd be 3 cycles per year. There's 22. And it's very close. It's to within 100th. So there's 22 cycles in 7 years. There's a lot of things in the scriptures that are 3.5 years. 3.5, when you see 3.5 years or time times and a half, which tend to be, when they say time instead of year, when they say year, the Lord says year in scripture, he tends to mean a Hebrew year. And if he wants something that's about a year and not exactly Hebrew year, sometimes he'll say a time, and they tend to be Enoch years. And those 3.5 things are usually Enoch years, but they're very close to years. So when you see these things that are 3.5 Enoch years, or they'll say how many days, 1,260 days, then it's 300, then it's 3.5 days of 360. Anyway, very often it's 11 Mercury cycles. 7 years is 22 Mercury cycles, 3.5 is 11. And so when you look in the scriptures, I might have a slide on this, but I'm not sure I do, so I'll just do, I'm not looking ahead now. But there's a lot of things like, oh, I just cheated and looked ahead, and so let's go to the next slide. I do have an example on the next slide, 160. So when scriptures refer to 3.5 times, it often refers to 11 to whole, oh yes, not just to 3.5 Enoch years, but to holy days. They're 3.5 years that begin and end on the same holy day on the Mercury cycle. And a good example is Christ had a 3.5 year ministry. And it's exactly from baptism to resurrection. It is exactly 3.5 Enoch years, and it's exactly 11 Mercury cycles. On the Mercury calendar, it goes from 0 Lord to 1 Lord. And by the way, the 0 and the 1 count sort of the same, where you can use either one. They're almost interchangeable for counting intervals. And then on the Enoch calendar, he's baptized on 14 Autumn, which is the Feast of Tabernacles, and resurrects on 15 Spring, which is Easter Sunday, the day to resurrect, Sunday the 3rd. This is true in a lot. I don't think, let's go to the next slide, 161. Okay. There's lots of other examples, and we'll go through them as we go through the Mercury calendar. I was just giving you one ahead of time so you could see the idea. Now, you need a way to align, and I put this in for the technical side. If on the uniform calendar, you always use 117 days. We've talked about that. But on the actual Mercury calendar that tracks the planet, it turns out that you skip one. I'm putting in, this is just for the technical. This will not be on your final test to graduate. But you skip 1 Trecina in alternating sets of 11 and 12 cycles. And that one simple rule gets you incredibly close, way closer. In other words, it was designed. You can mathematically show what the expected, when you do these little tricks to use integers to approximate a irrational number. You can math. I took a whole course in this. It was only taught, I think, once at the University of Utah. When a guy was on sabbatical and never came back. And I took the course, and they showed you how to estimate the error when you make an approximation. And the error is way, way, way smaller than what is expected in this. So all of these things are an example of the hand of God, even before we start to discover how many calendars line up on and on holy days and all of that. So the point is, just remember, you skip entire Trecinas every once in a while to make it accurate. That's good enough for what you want, I think. Let's see, it's almost, let's try the next slide and see where a good stopping. I started a few minutes late, so I think we can go a little bit over on the actual length of when we stop, because the ones listening to the recorder, is to be the same. The Uniform Mercury calendar, which is UM is the abbreviation. Okay, I've already said this in words. It never skips. It's always 117 days. So that's just a reminder that that is the uniform. This is the first time I have a slide introducing the Uniform Mercury calendar. And before I just mentioned it. Let's just look at one more slide here, 163. This is worth looking at for a minute, and then we'll stop here. The whole life, we've seen with the Venus calendar that There were 9 key events in his life, and they happened one each on each of the 9 holy days of the Venus calendar. That was clearly planned, clearly done. But he only lived 33 years. And you only get about 25, 24 cycles, 25 in that time of Venus. You can't have too many of them line up on an exact number of cycles. So they're not on integer numbers of cycles on Venus in the life of Christ, because his life is too short. When you get to these patriarchs with 300 or 900-year lives, then yeah, you can do all kinds of amazing things on having everything line up. But Venus is quick enough that it goes around 3 times a year, so it's about 100 times in his lifetime, and it can have all kinds of things line up. And in particular, from the birth to the resurrection of Christ was 104 Mercury cycles of the real Mercury cycle, and it was exactly 103 Mercs. In other words, you can multiply 103 times 117, and you get 12,051. That's the exact number of days of his life from birth to resurrection. And so it comes out, and that's by the way, this is the shortest period when Mercury cycles and Mercs line up. In other words, one's off by a day, and you say, when will it come around again? And see, this is just one day, one cycle difference in them. So this is the shortest period of time where an exact number of Mercs equals an exact number of Mercury cycles. There's a lot of tricky math in this, and that's just how it is. But it's amazing. So right away, his life comes out exactly even in Mercury cycles on both kinds. He's born on the day 1 Lord on Mercury. Now it's going to be exact to his baptism also. He's baptized on the day 0 Lord, and he's resurrected on 1 Lord. So if you look back at the little graph, it's 93 Mercury cycles from birth to baptism, and then it's 3.5 years, or 11 Mercury cycles. We saw 11 is 3.5 years from his baptism to his resurrection. And they're all on the holy day that's his holy day. He's the Lord, and it's 1 Lord. On the what do you call it? The uniform calendar, he's born on 1 Lord, but now it's going to differ by 13 days at the baptism time, but it's still on a holy day. So it's incredibly clever. It's on 0 creation, and then it comes back to 1 Lord. So on the second line, the total between the 2 1 Lords is only 103 cycles, and on the first line it's 104, and that's why they're different in the middle. They're out of phase. On the sacred round calendar, he's born on 1 reed, which symbolizes resurrection. And I remember we learned that he swaps resurrection and birth. He's baptized on 13 water, and that is the day for baptism. Or it could be 1 water, but 13 is the high point for water, and it's a high day of being baptized, a holy day. And then he resurrects on the day temple, 13 temple, and temple represents birth. So he's baptized on the day it means, and then he's swapped birth and resurrection. And they do this swapping and stuff, so I believe, so that Satan can't figure it out. You can't say, oh, Savior's so cool, he'll for sure be born in 1 temple the day for birth. No, that's a secret. He's born in a cave. Some wise men some shepherds get to see. Some wise men figure out what they can from the stars, but not Herod's wise men, and not most people totally missed it, and that's what it was supposed to be. And then I have the dates both on our calendar and on the Julian day, which, as you remember, just counts days continuously from about 4700 BC. All righty, we will stop there today and open it for questions. I do not recall receiving any questions, so I will look at the chat box, and here's a question. He says, I didn't understand how you got from the 116 to 117 for that calendar. Okay, all of these planetary calendars are going to be based on the trecina of 13 days. So the 117 is a multiple of 13 days that's as close as to the actual. Just like 364 is multiple of 13 days, and that's close to the actual year of 365 and a quarter. It's within about a little more than a day. This one's also within a day. So if you use the 117 all the time, man, it would get way off. It'd be a day off on every cycle, and it's 3 times a year. Every year you'd be 3 days off, and that's unacceptable. So the whole purpose of the uniform calendar is not at all to track the actual planet. The uniform calendar talks about a day of birth of Mercury when it's somewhere totally else in its orbit. It's not actually tracking the planet. It's a symbolic thing which can be used to represent birth anytime during the year. The real Mercury calendar does average the 1,500 and 15.877538 days. And I told you how it does that. It drops the trecina every once in a while, making it shorter, and it comes out amazingly exactly right. So that's the difference between them. But on all of these calendars, we'll be looking for an exact multiple of 13. And the way you know it's designed is it's always close. It's within a day. And a multiple of 13, if it were random, it could be 6 or 7 days off. But they're not random. They're all within a day. See, Venus is 5 times as much, but it's still within a day. The real orbit is about 584, and the multiple is 585. So to me, it's clear that it was designed. Hopefully that answers the question. If not, let me know. And are there any other questions? Oh, I'll ask a question. Have you figured out just what the Mercury calendar is for compared to what the Venus calendar is for? Oh, excellent question. No, but I have an idea. Mercury dates are not rare at all. Every 13 Mercury holy days, every 13 days is either a number 1 or a number 13 on the sacred round. Those are always holy days. All of them are holy days. I told you there's 9 phases. The first and last days are always holy. So any day that's a holy day on the sacred round, like 1 reed, 13 water, is guaranteed to be a holy day on the Mercury. So you say, well, gee, you got holy days like every 13 days. What's the point? How can you read that? How can you know what it means? How can you say it's a rare thing? Well, the use seems to be as a second witness when it comes up the same as the Venus day, or if both of the Mercury cycles together happen to be on the same, and that's fairly rare because they are usually out of phase. Then it has more meaning, and I tend to only count its meaning when I have 2 witnesses from Mercury, either on both the regular and the uniform version, or Venus, Mercury as a second witness to Venus. Now, I already warned you that on the uniform versions, you can't do that because Mercury always is on the same day as Venus, and so it's not used there. But let me tell you something that took me a long time to figure out on the same question. The way they work together, I thought they might be like the hour hand and the minute hand on a clock, where it was just one clock and not two clocks. In other words, think of the Hebrew calendar. It uses the sun for years, and it uses the moon for months. They're like two hands on a clock. I don't know of a calendar that is just a lunar calendar that just counts lunar cycles. The Muslims use a lunar calendar, and they just count cycles of the moon. They do not use the sun. I've tried that. I can't make it work. I don't think that's a real sacred calendar, just only because I can't make it work. So the Hebrew calendar has two big hands, sun and moon. So for a long time, I thought, well, I know how it's going to be. The Venus, it's going to be the same. Venus will be like the hour hand, and Mercury will be like the little minute hand, and they're going to be a team and work together. I could not make that work. So I just tried it the other way. There's a Venus calendar, and there's a Mercury calendar. That was amazing. That worked. So that's what I've concluded that it is. Each of the planets is its own. Oh, I'll tell you another that could be a pair, Jupiter and Saturn. They could be a pair of a sort, but I don't believe, I haven't done them yet. But I'm suspecting they're not, just because I now believe each of the planets will be its own separate calendar that works with or without any other planet. But anyway, Mercury seems to be a second witness, kind of a thing for Venus. And it's nifty that it's totally separate, because now the witness is actually independent of the real Mercury and the real Venus calendars. They have totally different ways of inserting the extra, or dropping the extra Tracinus. So when they line up, it's a big deal. And it's a witness. So the day Jesus is born is one Lord on the Venus calendar, and it's one Lord on the Mercury. The day they leave the Garden of Eden, when all the clocks line up, it's one Lord on Venus, one Lord on Mercury, and also one Lord on the uniform Venus and the uniform Mercury, which they always are together. But on all of those calendars, it's the beginning day. Actually, they're all on one creation. 13 days before, they're all on one Lord. But the day they leave the Garden of Eden, they're all on one creation, which is 13 days later. So they line up. It's important when they line up. That's my best answer so far. Okay, I'll be quiet. Any other questions?
So, John, as pertaining to all of the different calendars, and you've talked about the priest calendar, of course, and it has utility in for priestly functions, and all of these others. Off the top of your head, or considering all of the different calendars, what group of people, whether it be the Mayans, the Aztecs, the Hebrews, the whatever, why would they choose a different calendar and gravitate upon a certain planet? And what is there any considerations that you've made of why certain people, beyond the whole priestly calendar, would gravitate to certain calendars while other groups or cultures would utilize a different calendar?
Excellent.
Do you understand my question?
I understand, I believe. I'll give the answer, then you tell me if I understood it.
Yep.
The answer is, these calendars were all considered holy by different people. Why? Because somebody they considered holy taught it to them. They didn't just make this stuff up. And so the whole Aztec legend is that when their god Quetzalcoatl came over, he told them, he taught them this Venus calendar, not the Mercury. That one's not mentioned by them. Well, yes, it is. I have a quote where the Indians said, white man thinks there's only one morning and evening star, but there's really two. So there's little hints like that, but they kept a lot of their things secret. They didn't want to profane them with, white foolishness. And so, but to make it clear that the God they worshiped, who was Jesus Christ, taught them about his birth date and taught them that when he resurrected, Venus was resurrecting on that day. That's what got me into all of this. That was not taught to the people over in the Far East or the Near East in Jerusalem. They were taught about the Hebrew calendar and how Christ fulfilled that, and they're all following the law of Moses and Hebrew calendar. The Nephites followed that too, but they kept saying, well, we're actually above this because we understand it and we fulfill it, but we don't think it's the whole ball of wax. So he's given, so one of my first slides, I think I show that, yeah, we did. There's two continents, or two hemispheres, and just like there's a Bible for the Eastern and a Book of Mormon for the Western, there's all of the calendars based on the week, which is the Hebrew calendar and the priest calendar and the star calendars are all over in the East based on the week. And over here, which is 7 days, and over here in the Americas, they're all based on 13 days, and it's the planets. And what's really slick is you get the testimony of two hemispheres. All of the key events in the Savior's life were holy days on the Hebrew calendar. All 9 were key holy days. And all of them, those same dates, are key holy days on the Venus calendar. And by extension on the Mercury, because the Mercury is always holy on those days. It's just a matter of whether it lines up on the same day or not, or something meaningful. So the point is they're totally separate calendars. One's based on 13, one's based on 7. They're based on orbits that look irrational, that astronomers say, well, they're obviously random numbers. And they're not random numbers. After long periods of time, all these holy days line up, and they are a witness of the creation of God. And they're two witnesses from two hemispheres. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
You bet. Okay, I got another one here. Oh, well, this one says privately. I don't, let me see if no, this is a everybody question. He says, what about the periods themselves change? Like days and years get longer or shorter? The only period, that's an excellent, this has got to be a public question. This is an excellent question. The only period of all of them that changes significantly is the length of the year. The length of our year is changing. And I went to great pains to figure out, they have estimates, astronomers can estimate exactly what it was. Now, this is not given Velikovsky and Earth's crashing in a 360-year period in the past. This is just what we know today and project it back. But the length of the year changes noticeably from the time of Adam to now. I calculated what it was then, what it is now. I calculated an average because I told you it's just the average that's important. And it is not very significant. It goes from 365 0.21 in the future, and it started out at it averages out exactly what the Gregorian year is that the Pope Gregory the 13th came up with. I was astounded. You average it, so it goes to 365 from 0.21 to about 0.28 or 9 or something like that, and the average is 365.2425. So it was 0.242. I left out the 4. 0.2421 to 0.2429 comes out 0.2425. That is the year we used. So it's close enough for the whole time. The other planets are even closer. And all I know is when I use the numbers that I looked up, that number with all those digits, all the other ones except for the Earth, I looked up and they work. And it looks like the Lord's using them. I wasn't sure what he'd be using for the year, and so I calculated that one. And it turns out it's the same as Pope Gregory's calendar, which I was amazed at. So the point is, the changes are not important over 7,000 years. And this whole thing is only for 7,000 years, as far as I can tell, plus the little season at the end. It's about 7,200 years. So hopefully that answers that question. So yeah, it works. If you look up at the days when I say Venus calendar Venus is being born, it'll be within about a week, and that's pretty close for a calendar that's over a year and 3/5 long. Remember, and maybe it's more than a week because you'd only be within a week if it was perfect to within the nearest Tracina, see? So it's probably, it might be 2 weeks off sometimes, worst case. But the point is that's when things happen. It's not on the actual observational day. Oh, we're past time. Let's end it there and we'll start on 164 next time.
Okay, so John, you do have one final question.
Okay.
In the chat. I don't know, since we're late, if you want to go, or we could just jump into that next week. What's your preference?
Oh, I see it here. Have you computed the holy days when Christ was in the Americas? Yes. You can look at those on my complete chronology. There's also a paper on it. In one sentence, Moroni says in 3rd Nephi chapter 4, he says, toward the end of the year, after the destructions, towards the end of that, which were on the 4th day of the year, toward the end of that year, he comes. Well, you know how Hebrew calendar jumps around within a month. It turns out that was a short year. And so if you look at when Passover was, the year after the resurrection, it comes early, and it comes at what would be the end of the Nephite year, which they're using the 365-day year. And so basically he appears at Passover, which is always when he's appearing at the meridian of time, a year after the resurrection. It's a long time. And when it says they were looking at the changes in Bountiful, they were looking at how it had been repaired, not how it had been destroyed, I believe, because it was a whole year later. And anyway, they were looking at the changes in a year, whatever they were. So yes, I have look at that, and it's Passover again.
And then you have one more. Do you want to address that now, or do you want to do it next week?
Let's see if I can even see it. Oh yeah. I don't see it even here. I think I've answered all the ones I can see.
It's from Matt, and he says, do you see it now?
Well, I answered that one. I don't see how it works over the long term. That's what I answered. Oh, the first one was private and the second one was public. And so I think it's the same question.
You didn't answer the second half of my question. Are the dates in the New World all on the Mercury-Venus calendars?
Oh, I'd have to look. Look on my, look it up on my, especially the one that's the complete chronology, and it'll give the dates, and then you can look at what they are on all 16 calendars. The main ones. Oh, you know what? And it will even, it might even say there, that's tricky, because it might not even say it's on Passover. I remember this. It would be on Passover for them. This is one of the rare times when their Passover might not fit the other Passover. It might not even, anyway, you can look at them there, and it may not even say Passover, but I wrote a paper on it, and I believe it was Passover for them when they came. There's different calendars for calculating Passover. I'll just tell you the one. Well, I was 5 minutes late. We're 5 minutes late ending. When Jesus holds Passover, he holds it on a Thursday night with the disciples. Then he's killed with the lambs Friday, and the Jews hold Passover Friday night. They were both correct. One was doing it according to Moses, and the other was doing it according to the, I call it the sunrise calendar, the sunset calendar. The Nephites would have been using the calendar of Moses, which was actually fulfilled. It's part of the law of Moses, and it's fulfilled at the resurrection of Christ. And so it didn't actually work the next year, but they would have still been using it. I can't put all of that in one line of a chart, but the one I use is good from Adam, from the beginning and to the end. And Moses's was only good from Moses to Christ, because it was important that he could celebrate Passover before he got killed on Passover. It was this tricky stuff in this, but that's beyond. So we'll stop there. See you all next week, and I'm glad people are thinking about this stuff.
All right. Thanks, everyone, for joining. We'll put it up on Restoration Archives. Look forward to talking with you next week. Good night.